All right, guys, thanks for clicking on the video. This is a talk from my event that I had in January 2025 in Toronto. We had a total of 10 speakers, lots of social, lots of side conversations going on, but these are the actual talks from the event. I'm only able to release somewhere between half and 2/3 of them because some of the topics that we covered would not be suitable for YouTube, and or the speaker wanted to remain anonymous due to the topic that they're discussing. So the stuff that you see me put out here to my email list or the membership on the Unplugged Alpha channel is for you guys. It's totally free, so enjoy it. The next event will be in 2025. Make sure you visit my website at richcooper.ca and get notified for when the next event is, because trust me, you won't want to miss it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Peace out.
Thank you, Rich. Hi, everybody. I'm Orion. I'm very happy to be here. First, I would like to take a moment to thank Rich. This has been a fantastic experience so far. I'm so glad that you asked me to attend and to present. It's quite an honor and an opportunity. I've also been very impressed with the quality of the event and the other speakers. So thank you very much for this weekend. It's been very special so far. So also, what I'm going to talk about is kind of in my wheelhouse. I can go as high or as deep or as fast as you guys want. It might help me to know how I can help you if you do give me questions, because that will allow me to kind of read the barometer of the room so I can make this talk more valuable to this actual crowd here. I really do want to deliver value today. And I was thinking about what I wanted to discuss, and I decided to do a general overview of the sexual marketplace, which is a chapter from my forthcoming book. So this is also a chance for me to kind of riff some new content. It will touch on some of the things that I talk about in my channel, but it will also go much past that, so there'll be a lot of new content, even for those who are not familiar with who are familiar with my work. Okay. So let's talk about this. What I'd like you to consider is that the sexual marketplace is like a dock. You know, the place where the ships moor, and that this has been the case since the dawn of time, and it will continue to be the case for the indefinite future. Features of the dock will change from culture to culture and from moment to moment, but the dock is essentially the same. And what happens at the dock is that there are two types of people. There are captains and there are passengers. And the way the dock works is that a captain can moor his vessel, and the passengers can go around the dock and choose which vessel they want to secure passage on. So there are captains and there are passengers. And what's interesting is that technically these roles are gender neutral. Historically, that's not been the case. Historically, men have always had to / got to be captains, and women historically have always had to got to be passengers. I use that really awkward construction to acknowledge that there are actually benefits and liabilities to both roles. It's not like being a passenger is necessarily a bad thing. It can be a really good deal if you can secure the right passage. And being a captain isn't always just smoking cigars with your feet up on the table. There are a lot of responsibilities and risks involved in doing that. We'll see, however, in today's modern age, now that we've really worked to divorce sex from these marketplace roles, how that affects the sexual marketplace. That'll be near the end of this talk. And we'll see how there are interaction effects. Like when gender and role match versus mismatch, we see all kinds of things ripple throughout the sexual marketplace. So the first thing you have to understand, Rich talked about this a little bit yesterday, is that everybody starts as a passenger because we all start soft and ignorant and small. Not everyone gets to become a captain. Becoming a captain is a very difficult task. I think it can take at least 10 years of hard work. And there is no guarantee that you arrive at the captaincy even after that decade of effort. So this actually gives captains an advantage in the sexual marketplace because there will always be more passengers than captains. And this does create a supply and demand kind of a situation. So captains will always be in higher demand than passengers. So That's the carrot on the stick to motivate captains to undergo that decade of transformative work that's required to ascend to his captaincy, is that it puts that person in a more advantageous position vis-a-vis the sexual marketplace. So how does a person become a captain? So there are 3 things that are necessary for any person who wants to ascend to his or her captaincy. These are necessary and sufficient, which means that if you do these 3 things, you don't have to do anything else. You are a captain de facto. I call these the 3 captain's challenges, okay? And they are, very simply, to build a boat, to learn to sail, and to plot a course. Build a boat, learn to sail, and plot a course. And I'm going to talk about each one of those more briefly because I know that there are a lot of captains in this room already, and we can move over to some of the other parts of the talk. So obviously a captain needs a ship. A captain without a ship is a charlatan. So how does a person build a ship? It requires resources and knowledge. The timber costs money. The cloth for the sails costs money. You need funds in order to create the vessel. But funds are not enough. There is also knowledge that is required. And I don't mean the knowledge that you can learn from books or in school. I mean, technically speaking, the knowledge that is necessary is knowledge of the way things work. Knowledge of how things are in reality. Not how we want them to be, not how we think they should be, but how they actually are. And this is really important because if you lack that knowledge, even if you do succeed in generating the money and the resources, you won't long be able to keep them. Like it's hard to kind of luck into money and fame and status. But if you don't have the knowledge that's grounded in reality, it's very difficult to retain those things over time. And what's the point of taking the risk and effort of getting those things if you can't keep them? Like any good general knows that it's kind of pointless to take a castle that you can't keep, because why go through the risk associated with capturing it? So you need to have a plan to retain after you've acquired. And the way to do that is to have accurate knowledge of the way things work. And you know that you have accurate knowledge of the way things work because things work. Like the fundamental litmus test of whether you know what you're talking about is that you can do the thing. That's it. It's not like school learning. It's that can you make the plane fly? Like knowledge of aerodynamics not by itself does not allow anybody to build a functional airplane. It's useful. However, it's even possible to build a plane without knowledge of those forces per se. I don't think the Wright brothers really understood what the principles of the airfoil, but they were able to make that happen. So ultimately, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, right? So we know that we have the knowledge when we have that demonstrated proof that we can make the plane fly, when we can get what we want. Okay, so now we have the vessel, the ship, but that's not enough to be a captain. That just means that you had enough money to basically construct the vessel. You also have to learn how to sail. Now, learning how to sail doesn't simply mean understanding how to make a boat move. A child can make a boat move. Like there are children who can sit at the helm and guide a boat, especially when the seas are calm. This is really important. Everyone is a good sailor when the seas are calm. So the ability to sail is really the ability to make a ship move in a storm. That's what being a true mariner is. And until somebody has been tested in that way, we actually don't know whether we can trust that captain to get us through the inevitable crises that arise as we make our way through life. So this also requires self-mastery. So in order to maintain composure in the midst of a crisis, a person must possess emotional discipline, must possess some forms of competence, must possess some forms of virtue, must be able to keep a level head when everyone else around him or her is losing theirs, right? Now, with respect to the sexual marketplace, there are two additional things that are absolutely necessary to learn. Otherwise, captains aren't going to have a lot of success, and those are seduction and frame management. Okay. Every relationship, whether it lasts for one night or for the rest of your life, has three phases. There's always an attraction phase, there's always a negotiation phase, and there's always a maintenance phase. Even if that gets collapsed into just a few text exchanges or it's drawn out in a courtship that lasts for years, there's always attraction, negotiation, and maintenance. So a captain who lacks skill in seduction is unable to competently move an interaction in the direction of a sexual encounter. In which case, what's the point of constructing the boat and learning to sail? This is really, really important because I call some of these things attraction proxies. This is really important to understand because there's a lot of content online about how to get women. And like they say, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. We know that all things being equal, women prefer men with money, right? If you have two guys and they're exactly the same and this guy makes 50 grand a year and this guy makes 500,000, why wouldn't a woman choose this man, right? And so they think, okay, well, all I need to do is get money. And once I get money, the women are going to be lining up outside my door. And that's not really how it works. They might if you're famous, we can talk about that, but just having money isn't quite the same. And so sometimes what guys do is they grind for 10 years, 15 years, and they actually succeed in developing some sort of net worth, but they're still terrible at seduction. They still don't know how to approach a woman. They don't know how to confidently lead an interaction in the direction of a sexual encounter. And it's almost like they have to start from zero again. This might be difficult for some of you to understand. Before I became a psychologist, I actually worked as an actor, a stage actor in New York City for 13 years, which was a fun gig, but I was broke for most of my life. I was living in subsidized housing in Brooklyn, like month to month. However, in that situation, it was easier for me to attract women than it was when I was a rich and successful doctor. It's changed a little bit now that I've become kind of famous, but the point is when I was an actor, I had a little stage. We talk about the importance of being a contextual alpha. It's like even though in an hour on YouTube, I now get more views than all the people who have ever seen me on stage in that 15-year period I was an actor, because I was in that little sphere and I was on the stage and the lights were on me and people were looking at me and applauding and the reviews, it was very, very easy to attract women. Versus once I did the hard work to get the doctorate and I set up in a successful practice, well, only 30 people in the whole world knew if I was any good at what I did. And I wasn't allowed to talk about what I was going to do. So maybe not a great career choice for me, but the confidentiality is kind of necessary to the therapeutic arrangement, right? The point is, if you're really good at something, you have to let the world know that you have that skill. Otherwise, it's like $1 million in a vault at the bottom of the sea. It's like useless to everyone, right? So one of the best ways so we need to continue to grow our ability to seduce so that we can take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves. The second thing that's important for captains to learn is frame management, because once the attraction succeeds, once the negotiation occurs and the passenger actually gets on the ship, you want to be able to go where you want to go, right? Otherwise, what's the whole point? You need to be able to maintain authority and direction once the ship leaves the harbor. A lot of people think because of Disney and Hollywood and romantic tropes that when the man and the woman get on the boat and they sail off into the sunset, that's the happily ever after. That's actually just the beginning of the story, right? If you only know how to work up until that point, you're going to be unprepared for what happens once you lose sight of land, which is actually where the real negotiation begins to occur. So captains need seduction and frame management to take advantage of the vessel that they've constructed. Now, why was I talked a little bit about how being the contextual alpha and having the eyes, the attention, was helpful for me when I was an actor. It's also important to understand that all things being equal, yes, women want high status, wealthy men, but what is the ship? The ship analogy is an emotionally compelling lifestyle. That's what's actually most important for a captain to attract passengers. So one of the phrases that I sometimes throw around is that men want the Barbie doll, right? They want the 36, 24, 36. Women want all the shit the Ken doll comes with. They don't even care about Ken. And that's why Ken comes in all these different flavors. There's Cowboy Ken, and there's Stockbroker Ken, and there's Malibu Stacy Ken, et cetera, because each one of those represents a different possibility. It's a story. It's a fantasy. Because what a woman sees as a man is, okay, the man he's there, he's around, but he has the ship. So what can I expect if I secure passage on this ship? And so you want a woman to be able to see clearly, to fantasize in granularity what she might hope to expect by coming on your boat. And that doesn't necessarily require money. Like, there are actually tons of young guys in garage bands living in their parents' basements who are getting laid all the time. Almost all women go through a musician phase, right? They usually get out of it. But why do they go through it? Because there's a clear fantasy associated with about that. It's like he's kind of edgy. He's a performer. He's sensitive. Maybe he'll write a song about me. Like, that's emotionally compelling. Even if it might not be in her long-term best interest, she's willing to give it a shot. And so this is why I think it's also really important for captains to very clearly market themselves. I made a video about this a while ago, that most men are wallpaper. And the biggest risk as a man is not taking a risk. We should be able to know more or less what you're about simply at a glance by looking at you, because that's about all the time and effort most people are going to give to you anyway. So if you can't make a clear presentation about who you are and what your life is about, most people aren't going to give you much time beyond that, right? So you need to be able to capture people very clearly, which means you kind of have to paint with broad strokes. Once people get hooked, then they can learn that you're a more nuanced and interesting person, more complex. But in the beginning, that's probably not in your best interest. I mean, think about it. If you were needing a plumber in your house and you go on the internet and you look for plumbers near me, and there was a guy who was like, I'm Bob the plumber, and there was a guy over here who was like, I'm George the plumber who also does wedding cakes. It would be a very strange situation. Like, how could that guy be the best at both being the plumber and making wedding cakes? The guy probably doesn't get business in either one of these because he hasn't chosen to specialize. People don't like being put into boxes. I get it. It's uncomfortable. But in terms of business, it's really good for people to say, oh, Bob the plumber. Because when they need a plumber, they're going to immediately associate to Bob. Now, if you work with Bob over the time, you might come to learn more about him, and you might actually have a person-to-person relationship with him. But in the beginning, he's just Bob the plumber, and that's how you are going to be to the vast majority of people if you're anything at all. Because frankly, most people are just Bob. And what the fuck are you going to do with Bob? Like, you don't know. That doesn't necessarily mean that Bob is useless, right? I'm sure Bob has his uses, but he hasn't made it very clear to other people what his uses are, okay? So we have build a boat, learn to sail, and the third captain's challenge is to plot a course. So having a ship is not enough to be a captain. Knowing how to sail just makes you a mariner. It just means that you're competent and seaworthy. To be a captain, you need to be able to plot a course, which basically means that you have the authority to dictate where you go and how you get there. And that authority needs to be respected and responded to by everyone on board, or else you are not the captain. Whoever is on board who does have that authority is the captain, okay? So this is also the pretext for the journey. Life is very hard, as many of you already know, and it's bounded on both sides with pain. And to leave the safety of the harbor is an inherent risk. Not all sailors who go out in the morning come back at night. So why go through the trouble? Why take the risk? Why suffer the pain? You need a personally compelling reason to do so, or else you'll never leave the harbor. So nominating that destination is the pretext for the journey. It also makes it easier to realign yourself once you inevitably get blown off course because of the tides and the weather and unexpected events that happen. You need that North Star to sail by. Otherwise, when you're out on the trackless sea, every direction looks good. And in that state, no port is favorable, okay? So those are the three captain's challenges. Build a boat, learn to sail, plot a course. If you do those three things, congratulations, you are a captain. Any questions so far? Okay, I'm riffing then. So this is in conjunction. On the other hand, there's the passengers. Now, passengers don't need to do anything to be passengers because everyone's a passenger by default. However, they do have three prerogatives. I call them prerogatives because captains have to do the things that I just described to become captains. Passengers don't have to do these things, but they kind of have the right to do them if they so choose. And as we'll see, these prerogatives actually dovetail very nicely with the captain's challenges. It's like every challenge that the captain has to overcome is actually a response to one of the prerogatives of a passenger. And what are the three prerogatives? They are to inspect the ship, test the captain, and examine the itinerary. That's what all passengers get to do. They get to inspect the ship, test the captain, and examine the itinerary. So let's talk about this, because most of you guys, I'm going to assume in this room, are captains, and you're looking to bring passengers on board. So your ability to do that is really your ability to reassure passengers on these three prerogatives, okay? And if you're having trouble attracting passengers onto your ship, there are solutions. You just need to find at what point in the funnel you're having difficulty, and I can teach you how to move past that. So here's the interesting thing, is that a lot of the inspection of a ship happens way before the passenger gets on the ship. Remember, the passengers are walking around the dock, right? So the very first thing that a passenger is going to notice is the vessel. This looms large. It's way bigger than the captain. And there are big three-masted ships, and there are submarines, and there are ferry boats. There's all kinds of ships in the harbor. And the first litmus test for a passenger is, does that ship look seaworthy? Does that ship look comfortable? Does that ship look interesting or exciting to board? And if not, that passenger is just going to keep walking, okay? Now, here's the other thing, is passengers don't have unlimited time. They have places they want to go. So they actually can't really examine thoroughly every ship in the port, right? So one of the proxies that they use to test the seaworthiness of the ship is the size of the crowd in front of any given boat. This is not a guarantee that that's a good ship, but basically the thinking is, well, I don't really have time to do the due diligence, but someone in that crowd must have had the time, which is not necessarily true. And since there's so many people in front, that must be a boat worth checking out. So first they examine the vessel, then they examine the size of the crowd in front of the ship. A ship that looks great but has nobody in front of, it's fishy, isn't it? It's like, why isn't anybody lining up for that fantastic looking ship? It's suspicious. That's just how it is, right? And then once they get close to the crowd, because they're like, I like this ship and there's a crowd, so there must be something here, they begin to listen to the captain. They look at him. They listen to his words and his tone. And then, if they like what they hear and they like what they see, they kind of make their presence known. And then there might be an interaction with the captain, and then the passenger eventually gets to board the ship and kick the proverbial tires and take a look under the hood to make sure everything is okay. But my point is that the vast majority of the inspection occurs before the passenger gets on the ship and before the captain is even aware that the passenger is there. Like, the passenger will only make the presence known once all those other tests are passed, right? So if captains are having trouble attracting passengers on board, you have to figure out at what stage of the funnel it is. It could be they don't like your ship. Like, it's not interesting or comfortable in terms of its optics. So if that's the case, you need to invest in your lifestyle. And that doesn't necessarily, like I said earlier, mean make more money, though of course who wouldn't want more money? It's better to have it than not. It means you have to kind of cultivate an emotionally compelling lifestyle and to be able to communicate that in a clear and understandable way to your audience. This is like business. One of the amazing things about women in relationships is that if it works in business, it typically works with women, okay? Because they're actually the same enterprise. Both business and relationships are about trying to procure value from other people, okay? It's a game of procuring value. Relationships are the medium in which value is transacted. That's my fundamental thesis for the book. We need relationships because we need things from other people. And if we can, but they're also, so people are a opportunity because you might have things that I want, but you're also a risk and a threat because you might not give them to me. So we have to learn how to navigate that. And the best way that we've come up with is basically bartering. Is people come into relationships to exchange unequal things of comparable value. Unequal things of comparable value. I'm not going to give you what you have, you already have it. That's why they're unequal, but they have to have comparable valuations, right? So that happens in business. That's how you form strategic partnerships. You can do something that I can't, and what you can do will add value to my business and vice versa. The same is true for relationships. So you have to provide a value proposition. So the second thing, if you're having trouble attracting passengers, it could be that you need a crowd in front of your boat, right? The easiest way, I made a face because it's not easy, but it's easier than most things, all things being equal. The easiest way to do this is to be visibly competent. Visibly competent. So one of the reasons why women post their bodies on Instagram is because women maintain optionality by being visibly attractive. Because all things being equal, men are going to respond to cues of attractiveness, reproductive fertility, youth, etc. And so if she's publishing that, she's going to be generating a funnel, a constant stream of attention towards her. Men can't really do that. Men can't really do that. The way that men do that is by being visibly competent. If you do something well, you need to be sure that the rest of the world understands that you do that. And the fact of the matter is, it's never been easier in the history of the world to be able to do that because of social media. It's not easy. It can take a few years, but all things being equal, we live in an opportunity where you could tell the whole world about the thing that you do better than anybody else from your living room without leaving your house. It's amazing. The power and the opportunity of social media is absolutely incredible. So men generally need some sort of social media presence. I think YouTube is often a better vessel for men than Instagram, which tends to be more visible. And it also doesn't have to be geared towards women. If 1,000 men are looking at you and supporting you and praising you, then you have that kind of social validation that at least among those 1,000, you're kind of like that contextual alpha. There are people looking up to you, which means that all things being equal, a woman is more likely to see that man as high value relative to the men in his milieu, okay? So find a way to become visibly competent and let the world know what you're good at. And finally, if somebody gets close and they don't make their presence known to the captain, there could be issues with the captain's personal presentation. So that has to do with fitness, that has to do with fashion, and that has to do with the ability to communicate with charm and charisma. A lot of guys blow their chances by opening their mouths. It takes a long time to learn how to talk, especially how to learn how to talk to women. It requires a little bit more effort. It's not as straightforward and direct as talking to men. So you might want to consider examining at what stage in the funnel are you likely experiencing difficulties, because that will suggest the solution to overcome that difficulty. Okay? The next thing that passengers get to do is they get to test the captain. Now, the way that they do this is to cultivate arbitrary difficulty on land, because that is the clearest proxy for how the captain is going to handle non-arbitrary difficulty out at sea. And so that's what is commonly referred to as shit tests in our milieu. So, but it kind of makes sense. It's like, how do you test out a car? You don't treat it nice, right? You're kicking the tires and you're pushing the pedal to the metal and you're twisting around corners. You're basically doing everything that you can, while you can, to reveal any kind of hidden failings or flaws before you sign the papers. And then once you sign, you drive off real careful, right? Like no one is nicer to their car than somebody who just bought it. So the thing to remember about these sorts of tests is that they indicate a high level of interest. Very few people test drive cars for fun. They're not like, I have nothing to do on a Sunday, I might as well go down to the Lexus dealership. Like, that doesn't happen. People test drive cars when they have a very high interest in buying, okay? So if somebody is testing you, as infuriating or frustrating or difficult as that might be, it suggests that they're actually pretty close to signing the contract, as it were. And the way to handle that as a captain is emotional indifference and willingness to apply consequences. That's it. So emotional indifference is sort of outcome independence. It's sort of like, yeah, if you buy, great. If you don't buy, great. Because you're thinking, if you don't buy this car, there's going to be someone in 15 minutes who will. So I actually don't need you to buy this car because I've taken care of a funnel. There's a crowd of passengers outside of my ship who are actually interested in this. And in fact, I have an 11 o'clock, so I do need to wrap this up. Do you understand? Okay? And then a willingness to apply consequences, which suggests that you are trustworthy. A man who cannot stand up to a woman cannot make a woman feel safe. Because if a man can't stand up to a woman, how is she going to reasonably expect that he will stand up to other men who are the real threat? So that exchange is a proxy for the man's ability to provide protection in the larger world relative to actual threats, okay? And the way to fail that is to become defensive and emotional. So you apply consequences with impartiality. You don't become angry or petulant or sulky. You just say, hey, this is how it is. This is the terms of the agreement. If that works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you, great. But that's how it is. And you allow them to make the choice. And then the third is they get to examine the itinerary, right? They get to decide, is this captain going where I want to go? And this is really tricky, because you might think that this is the most straightforward part of the exchange. You go down to a modern port or a modern airport, it's very clear. This plane is going to Hong Kong, this plane is going to Cairo, except that's not how the sexual marketplace is. The sexual marketplace is not like a modern airport, it's more like a port in the 18th century Caribbean, where there's like legitimate businessmen next to pirates and buccaneers. There's all kinds of dealings that are happening, and deceit and deception will always be a part of the game in the sexual marketplace. And so generally what's actually happening is captains are kind of pretending, more often than not, that they are interested in a committed relationship. Because if they come right out of the gate and say, I'm actually just attracted to you and I want to have a purely sexual relationship, it doesn't work. I don't talk about studies very often in my work, but there's one really fascinating study that I want to share with you. It was done on college campuses, I think about 15 years ago. And what they did is they trained an attractive young man and an attractive young woman in a comparable script to go up to other young people on campus. And the script was basically like, hey, I've seen you around campus. I find you very attractive. Would you like to go to bed with me? That was the script. So what percentage of men do you think said yes to an attractive woman who offered that proposition? It wasn't 100, and I can understand why, because how freaky would that be? Like, if that happened to me, I'd be like, where's the camera? You know, this doesn't feel right. There's a trap here. And so only 75% of men said yes, because 25% smelled that there was something fishy going on, I'm sure. Okay, and more to the point, what percentage of women said yes to the 0%, not a single woman did. So this means that on some level, captains can't be entirely honest about their intentions, because when they are, the passengers say, oh, thank you so much, I really appreciate it, but that's not where I want to go. And they will never get anyone on their boat. By the same token, a lot of passengers, if they're clever, they're pretending that they just want something casual. Oh yeah, this is fine. I just want to hang out and see where that goes. Casual sex, I tell this to the women I consult, is the Trojan horse to getting a relationship. It's how you get through the door, and it allows men to not suspect what's going on. And over time, they come to develop an emotional bond. It's really, really stupid for women to come out of the gate and say, I'm looking for a serious relationship, which is what you see on every profile over 30 on the dating apps. It works about as well as a guy saying, I'm just looking for sex. And I try to tell that to women. They don't understand it. They think they're dating intentionally. But they have to actually date strategically. Both sexes do, or else they don't really get a chance to get what they want. Okay, so passengers get to do that. They get to inspect the ship, test the captain, and examine the itinerary. Now we'll get to kind of the interesting stuff, I think. Two more things. There are two necessary features of all marketplaces, if they're actually true marketplaces. And this is true of sexual marketplaces as well. You need antagonism, and you need competition. If you have a marketplace without antagonism and like free competition, you don't really have a marketplace, okay? Same thing is true with the sexual marketplace. You need antagonism and competition. Let's talk about each one in turn very briefly. Antagonism means that the interests of the parties doing business with each other are not essentially aligned. So the easiest way to understand this is in a corporate sense, between labor and management. Labor and management have an antagonistic relationship. They are not friends. They could be friendly, but they're not friends. Why? Because management always wants as much useful labor from this side for as little money as possible, and these folks want to do as little productive labor as possible for as much money as possible. The two interests are not aligned, and the more that this side gets what they want, the less this side gets what they want. It's actually kind of a zero-sum game in many sense. So there are captains and passengers and men and women, and there's antagonisms in both the roles and the sexes. So the easiest way to consider the antagonisms between captains and passengers is like examining what happens when you book a flight. Okay? If you're a passenger, you probably do a lot of due diligence. You compare your options against all other options. You want to know, I want the most direct flight for the cheapest possible, for the most comfort, right? And then you're going to choose your single best option. Why? Because a passenger can only be on one ship at a time. It's not possible for you to be on two ships at a time at the same time. But now see it from the airline's perspective. Are they doing due diligence on all of their passengers? Like, Not at all. In fact, the only real diligence that airlines do is at the airport, where they put you through the metal detector. So airlines aren't trying to secure their best option. They're just trying to weed out catastrophic options. As long as you're a paying customer and don't blow up the plane, it's not a problem, okay? So captains want the highest paying, most obedient passengers and want to cram as many of them as possible into the hold. And so you see that those two things are actually not aligned with each other. If the passengers demand, oh, I want a little bit more leg room, that means that they can't have as many seats on the plane, which drives down the incentives of the airlines, right? So when one side gets what they want, it has to come out of the other side's ledger, and vice versa. There's also fundamental antagonism between men and women. This is going to be an overgeneralization, but it's very much grounded in evolutionary psychology, which is this: all things being equal, men attempt to exchange resources for sexual opportunity, and women attempt to exchange sexual opportunity for resources. That's it. And I'm using the term resources in the most general, all-encompassing sense. Resource is anything of value besides sex in this definition. So it's not necessarily money. It could be attention. It could be a house. It could be emotional validation. It could be excitement and the tingles. It could be et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all things being equal, just like the passengers before they book a flight, women are going to examine their available optionalities among men, and they're going to choose their overall best option because they're a passenger. They can only be on one ship at a time, right? Finally, another necessary feature of the sexual marketplace is competition, which is that ultimately every buyer is also a seller. So when men are looking to acquire sex, they have to be willing to exchange resources in some level. When women present the sexual opportunity in the sexual marketplace, they're selling, but they're also buying that lifestyle and the resources that come with the man. So every buyer is also a seller. And focusing too much on just your side is a surefire way of not succeeding in the sexual marketplace. It would be like a businessman who didn't care what his customers wanted and just said, well, I really care about this. I love this product. I think it's really special, and I'm going to charge, an exorbitant price for it because that's what I think it's worth. But of course, if no one else agrees, you're not going to get anywhere, right? So all negotiations occur within this fundamental antagonism and in a spirit of competition. Ultimately, the very same is true in business. The best situation, if I'm dealing with you, is if I can retain all of my optionality and I can eliminate all of your optionality. That would be fantastic. That would allow me a lot of power. If I could restrict your ability to move, well, I retained all of my optionality and vice versa. And so you see this in the business world as in relationships. There are two ways to do this. You can either make yourself a better and better option, which allows you to command more power and influence in the negotiation, and you can restrict and take down your competition as well. And that works in business just as much as in relationships. Okay. So now we get to the fun part, which is the intersection of gender and role. Like I said earlier, captains and passengers are technically gender-neutral roles, whereas obviously men and women are not. So what we can see is that there's four possibilities here. We have male captains and male passengers, and female captains and female passengers. And the sexual marketplace treats these four types of individuals very, very differently. In point of fact, with all of our liberated ideas about gender and power, it's really only women who now have greater optionality within the sexual marketplace. For better or for worse, it's not really possible for men to be passengers. Male passengers tend not to get on any boats. They tend to just sit on the dock. They can't really be passengers because they can't secure passage on a female captain's vessel in the vast majority of cases. So de facto, that role is prohibited to them, whereas women in today's day and age are encouraged and incentivized and empowered to become captains. And so now we have a lot of female captains these days, okay? And there are some legitimate captains who go through that 10-year process and they have a career and they make a lot of money and they've extrapolated their lifestyle. that exists. The issue with this is that female captains create what I call the two-body problem. Has anybody heard of the two-body problem? Okay, a few people. I think that this term originally came from academia, which is basically this. If you're foolish enough to actually get a PhD, you're in for usually 5 to 10 years of isolation, pain, and struggle that is completely arbitrary and nobody else understands. It's like grad school is where fun goes to die. It's not a happy, good times place. And so what happens is that the prisoners tend to fall in love with each other because they're the only other person in the world that really understands what they're going through. And this happens all the time as PhD students, because they have these blinders on, they have to focus on their one little thing. They only have like 5 people around them and they end up getting into relationships with one of them, okay? Now fast forward 10 years and both the man and the woman have succeeded in becoming doctors. Let's assume that they both have the same trajectory. They both want to be tenured professors. Well, if you know anything about this situation, the market is awful for professors. Like there are probably thousands of PhDs that are minted every single year, and maybe 100 max tenured positions open up anywhere in the world. Like it's a terrible market to get into if you're a seller. It's definitely a buyer's market. So the vast majority of PhDs will not get an offer. And if you do, you don't really have a lot of power into dictating where it is. It's like you might get one offer and it's in rural Missouri. No offense to Missouri, but like that might not be where you want to go. But here's the real two-body problem, is that if you both are fortunate enough to get an offer, which is unlikely enough, the likelihood that those two offers are going to be within 1,000 miles of each other is functionally zero. You could be offered in Alaska and she could be offered in Puerto Rico or something like that. And so now it's like, oh shit. Okay, well, are we just going to do a long distance relationship? No, that kind of sucks. I don't really want to do that. Well, why don't you come with me to Alaska? And she's going to think, well, why would I do that? I just worked for 10 years to get this doctorate. Why don't you come with me to Puerto Rico, huh? And you're like, well, why would I do that? Because I just worked 10 years to get this doctorate. So here's the thing is, if you actually succeed in becoming a captain, which takes 10 years of effort and risk and struggle, you're not going to give that up for like anything. It would have to be such a significantly better offer than anything that you could create for yourself to ever become a passenger on somebody else's boat, right? And so the issue is that female captains are pricing a lot of men out of the sexual marketplace. This is based on the economic principle of marginal utility. Marginal utility basically means that the same good isn't as valuable to different people in different contexts. Like if you, as an employer, were to offer a guy who was kind of just living month to month $1,000 to work 50 hours a week, he might take it and be grateful for it because that $1,000 is very, very useful to him. But the same offer wouldn't be compelling to somebody who already had millions of dollars. That extra $1,000 is only marginally useful to him. Do you understand? So if a woman becomes a captain, a man will have to have like an order of magnitude more resources than she does to justify her giving up what she struggled for 10 years to achieve. And that's kind of rational and correct. But the issue is an order of magnitude is a lot. It's a zero. Like for a lot of female captains, they're only going to consider that if you make an additional zero more than she does, you know? Because it suggests that even though I'm going to be compensated for giving up my goals because I'm going to get more from being a passenger on this ship, far more than everything I'm going to achieve for myself, which is just not the case. I mean, men and women now more or less have comparable incomes, especially until children appear. In fact, I think for the first time in human history in the West, women under 30 who are childless make a little bit more than men under 30 who are childless. And this is just pricing so many men out of the market, because if women trade sex for resources, and you're not going to give me an amount of resources that actually functionally makes my life better or different, why bother? Do you understand? It's actually kind of a rational decision. And so what generally happens is that if women go through the process of attaining their captaincies, what is their victory? Like, what do they get at the end of this? Well, they get what the same. What's that? They might get cats eventually, because it takes them a while to get to the cats. In the beginning, they take a victory lap and they pat themselves on the back and they're very, very proud of what they've accomplished, and maybe there's some justification for that because it's hard to become a captain. But the ultimate reward of becoming a female captain is the same as becoming a male captain, which is you get to park your ship at the dock and try to attract passengers just like any other captain. Now, a female straight captain is going to want potentially a male passenger. But the male passengers are generally not the type of men that women dreamed of having access to when they started on that path, okay? And so that's when they eventually get the cats, because they see that they're not rewarded with a male captain. They're rewarded with the possibility of competing for male passengers, which is not a very attractive prospect to them. Okay, so running short on time, let me put a pin in this then. So what we see is that there are role-sex matches and there are role-sex mismatches. Still, even in today's modern age, male captains and female passengers are role-sex matches. And the reason why this continues to work is because both men and women have a socially sanctioned, monopolized good with which to transact. On the one hand, women are the gatekeepers of sex, like we've heard this weekend. We've said that they get to decide if and when sex happens, and there are strong punishments socially to any guy who says, no, I'm going to take that away from you, and I'm going to make the decision. So we've said that women have a monopoly on this. On the other hand, men are the gatekeepers of commitment. So they have a monopoly on whether they can give that exclusivity or they can move the relationship forward. And so these two people can kind of do business with each other because male captains transact their monopolized good, commitment, for the monopolized good, the sexual opportunity of female passengers. And this also kind of aligns with reproductive realities. So if male captains, remember, captains want to cram as many passengers on their ship as possible, right? So that kind of aligns with some of the biological reproductive imperatives of men. Like, you make trillions of sperm a month. Why is that? Like, you can only get your woman pregnant once a year. You know what I'm saying? What a waste. So from a biological perspective, men are reproductively successful if they can pass on their genes through multiple different women, because that basically means that their offspring has a better chance of surviving to adulthood because of the genetic variability. On the other hand, women create one egg a month. Having a bunch of passengers would be useless to her unless they were just like providing utility, right? From a reproductive standpoint, they're useless. And so that's why women are trying to find their single best option, and men are trying to secure the greatest number of non-terrible options, okay? That's also why generally men's sexual standards are much lower than women's sexual standards. They're like, hey, we'll pass you through the metal detector. If you don't have a bomb, yeah, okay, come on, let's go. Whereas women are much, much more picky because they get one shot a month and then they're off the market entirely for a year. So that means that we can talk about strategies for optimization very, very briefly. So male captains, they want to secure resources for sex with as many non-terrible options as possible. That's what they want as men, to trade resources for sex, and that's what they want to do as captains. So the way to do that is to invest in resource acquisition and lifestyle investment. Build the ship. The idea is to become your single best option to the greatest number of passengers. It's better for men to be the best option for fewer women than runner-up to everybody else. So I think Rich talked about this yesterday. Like 1% of women is still way more women than any of you studs could deal with in your entire life. So even if it means being more unattractive to 99%, you want to be very, very attractive to that 1% because women choose their single best option. And their default strategy is to wait, because as time goes on, men generally acquire more resources, status, and fame. So men will never be more disadvantaged in the sexual marketplace than they are today. Take that in. Okay, female passengers, they trade sex for resources with their single best options. They should invest in their physical attractiveness. They should invest in their bodies, keeping themselves fit, looking good. They want to be the single best, they want to be attractive relative to the greatest number of female competitors, even if that means that they are more attracted to fewer captains. They need to be able to beat out some of those female competitions, and their default strategy is to act, because all things being equal, they're never going to be more advantaged in the sexual marketplace than they are today. Then we get female captains. This one's really interesting. I came to this conclusion kind of surprisingly. So if they're women, they're going to trade sex for resources. But if they're captains, they're going to try to get as many non-terrible options as possible. So what we see is the proliferation of, let's say, OnlyFans, of Instagram, of other kinds of technology to leverage a woman's sexual opportunity. Women who do that are actually aligned with their reproductive values because they're saying, here is my sexual opportunity, and they're using technology to leverage it across a broad spectrum. They're getting as much non-terrible optionality as possible by transacting their sexual opportunity for resources. This is not new. What's new is the technology involved. 100 years ago, women still wanted to marry a millionaire, and they would do all kinds of things to angle for that man. But for the first time potentially in human history, it is easier for women to get $1 from 1 million men than to get $1 million from one man. Like, I actually think that that is true. That is a huge tidal change in the sexual marketplace. It's the same thing that was happening 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Women are still trying to get $1 million. The question is whether they get it from one guy or they get it from 1 million guys, and they have that optionality now. And generally, because that sexual opportunity is time limited and decreases as a function of time and value, women can do this, and then they try to secure, once they get into their 30s, they try to secure passage on the most attractive ship that they can have them. So they tend to switch strategies. They start as female captains, they try to get $1 from 1 million, and then they try to get the best passage that they can. One more thing, 2 minutes, got this, Rich. This one's also really fascinating. So now we have male passengers. So male passengers are kind of fucked, like I said, because, not literally, that's the issue. They might want to get on a female captain's ship, but the female captains don't want them. They're going to have very high price tags for their tickets because of marginal utility. They already have plenty of resources. Why would they exchange their sexual opportunity, which is necessarily limited and time-bounded, for just a little bit more money? So again, most passengers, male passengers, are priced out of the market. So how do male passengers, if they succeed, how do they succeed? Male passengers succeed by offering something to female captains that the male captains can't or won't. No, well, it could be simping, but it's like very specific, actually. Age?
Like 60-year-old and 20-year-old guy.
Well, it could be. Yeah? Romance. Romance is a poor man's game because it allows him to conjure value out of nothing. Because it says, I have something that's so valuable that the king can't give you. Okay, it is selling a dream. What the male passenger can give that the male captain won't is exclusive commitment. It's too expensive for a male captain to give exclusive commitment to any one passenger. Can you imagine you build this huge 747 and you sell one ticket? Like, it wouldn't work. So most male captains are like, that goes against my biological incentives, that goes against why I built this huge vessel over time. Why would I give that up? That doesn't make any sense. Here's the thing, exclusivity isn't equal. If I don't have any options, I can conjure value out of nothing by offering you my exclusivity. And women really want exclusivity, if for no other reason that it's the one thing that male captains generally don't give them. So male passengers compensate and they compete against male captains through marriage. They're trading resources for sex from their single best option. That is the strategy of male passengers. And that's why when you look at the vast majority of marriages, the man is not the most powerful person. I mean, we did a show of hands yesterday, a number of people are married. How many people are divorced in this room? Okay. Okay. All right. So I could talk forever. I know I've already gone over. Thank you for your patience. I look forward to your questions later.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.